No one knew his name when he began to cross the plains with a satchel of letters and the promise of staying alive. What they did know is that one afternoon he found 2 girls hidden under a shrub and changed 3 lives forever. Before we begin, subscribe right now and stay until the end, because this story has twists you won't see coming, and every detail matters to understand why they came back years later to choose him. The messenger carried dust on his tongue and cracks in his boots, but also that kind of faith only held by those who allow themselves no other option. What he called home was nothing more than a way station shack with pine walls, an old stove, and a low shelf where he arranged packages with a precision that didn't seem of this world. He learned to walk light and to listen to the land, because paths tell things: the dry crunch of grass when water is scarce, the distant roar of a stream born from a storm, the trembling of a log bridge when the wood warns it cannot bear another cart. That afternoon, with the sun shattering into tiny mirrors across the sand, he bent down to check a loose horseshoe and saw, as he lifted his gaze, the dark reflection of eyes fixed on him from the dry riverbed. It wasn't an animal. It was human hunger. He didn't draw his weapon. There was no need. He set the satchel on a stone and lowered his shadow by crouching until his knees nearly touched the ground. He opened the lunch tin and placed, one by one, his small treasures: 2 corn cakes wrapped in cloth, a strip of dried meat, a dented canteen that still kept the spring's freshness. He stepped back 3 paces and waited. From the mesquite came 2 girls, the older pushing the younger with the firmness of someone who had already learned to decide without permission. Their lips cracked, elbows all fiber, eyes very much alive. They ate without a sound. They drank with trembling hands, careful not to waste a single drop. When they finished, he tipped his hat and left. He came back at dawn the next day. Among the dust he found a circle drawn with a line across it. He didn't know if it was a signature, a warning, a prayer in the language of the earth. He left beans, bread, and water. He returned the next day, and the next, until one morning only 2 shining blue beads on a leather thong remained on the stone. He kept them in a tobacco tin, not out of nostalgia, out of direction. The years broadened his shoulders and his patience. The shack, once a man's corner, slowly turned into a small post. He replaced a board, reinforced a beam, hung nails where before there had been holes. He sketched with charcoal a map of routes on the wall and gave names to the winds to understand them. The west one came harsh, smelling of sparse fields. The south brought humidity and promises of clouds. The north whistled like a taut rope before a downpour. He never married. Not because he despised company, but because life had taught him that sometimes silence is the only thing that breathes with you when the hooves of night prowl. And yet, some sunsets he took out the tobacco tin and passed the beaded thong between his fingers, not to grieve but to remember that out there lay a line still untraveled. The drum of rain reached him one night while the lamp crackled and horse grease warmed the shack's air. The 2 knocks at the door didn't seem to ask permission nor demand entry. They were the certainty of someone who knows they've arrived at the right place. When he opened, 2 soaked figures filled the threshold. The elder, chin held high and gaze firm like one who had crossed more wastelands than she cared to remember. The younger, with a bundle tied to her chest with leather straps and her breath held back, not from fear but from care. Recognition struck like lightning without thunder. First the body knew what the eyes had not yet spoken. A gesture, a stillness, a way of measuring everything without blinking. He stepped aside and they entered. The shack filled with the scent of wet wool and smoke. There was no introduction. The elder untied her bundle and laid on the table a piece of leather with blue beads. He opened the tobacco tin, placed the old strip next to the new one, and the beads, under the light, traced a path in the air. She nodded. The younger received a dry shirt from his hands, disappeared behind a blanket hung as a curtain, and returned with her hair dripping in 2 rivers over her shoulders. The messenger stoked the fire, broke bread, served coffee, and gave them the bed. He stayed by the stove, on a blanket, listening to the rain beat on the roof like a million letters trying to enter the world all at once. Dawn brought low fog and the smell of damp wood. The newcomers did not probe the space. They inhabited it carefully, like those who respect but also recognize. The elder stirred the embers with the exact rod, without scattering sparks. The younger folded the blanket they had used, aligning the creases with a delicacy that showed not poverty but pride. He rose as if not to break a spell and pointed to the coffee pot. "Coffee," he said. The elder held his gaze with the smallest nod. The younger poured the water. They had breakfast in a silence that did not prick, but wove. Then came the doing. The messenger showed them the spring, the corral, the rope that had to be tightened so the beasts wouldn't push the fence. The elder carried the buckets with a tightrope walker's balance. The younger caught the escaping splinters and stacked them in rows that later would burn as if fire understood aesthetics. When the work was done, he knew there was no sense in hiding them. Neither the shack nor his trade was built on hiding. The only way to survive was in plain sight, working. The road to the exchange post creaked under the cart's wheels. The elder rode at his side, braid against her back. The younger sat behind, rapt but alert, hands hooked to the edge as if holding the load by sheer will. Entering the market was like shattering a pane of glass. Silence burst into stares. He gave no explanation. He asked for flour, salt, lamp oil, and needles, and said on my account, like someone building a bridge with nails and wood. The shopkeeper's wife twisted her mouth, but opened the ledger. Outside, two laborers nudged each other with words that smelled of mold. The messenger looked at them as one looks at the horizon before deciding whether to take the detour or run straight over it. There was no fight, only a shift in height where each found his rightful place. They returned with a full cart and a certainty. The shack was no longer a passage, it was a point. The elder rose early the next day and the next. The younger set the table, tightened knots, sewed a sleeve with stitches that looked like drawings. He went out with errands and returned with news he told without breaking secrets. They learned to share the air. The shack had 3 different breaths and yet only one cadence. People came timidly to leave guarded packages. They began to ask about schedules as if the post had always existed. An old dog chose the threshold to sleep, as dogs do when they understand that what matters is kept there. The first threat rode in on horseback, dragging dust and intent. The man in front wore a crooked star and a disdain that needed no words. "They say you've got 2 Indians here," he spat, more a challenge than a phrase. The messenger did not shift his weight. "There are people here," he said. "They work, they eat, they pay. If you have a paper, I'll read it. If not, I have routes." The elder stood at his left with her braid over one shoulder. The younger remained at the threshold with a teapot like someone holding a helm. The air vibrated for a second, a taut rope about to snap. It did not snap. They left with promises to return. That night, the door was left unbarred. Not in defiance of the world, but in agreement with time. To close it was like denying the road that had brought them there. The next morning, they worked as if life were just that, tightening, oiling, checking. The elder sank posts as one plants flags, the younger tied with an ancient science that knots recognize. At midday, he slipped on the plank by the spring. A small hand caught his waist and the body understood, once again, before the head did. In the afternoon, while sharpening an axe, the younger left a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed and neither fled from the spark. The elder crossed the room, placed her hand on his jaw, looked at him as one evaluates a horse before the mountain, not to doubt, but to measure, and the gesture said that what was being born was no whim, it was a route. They did not pronounce vows. They nailed new boards to a cot, hung a rope by the stove, sanded a table and left it so smooth that bread rolled over it like a little boat. On that table, he placed the tobacco tin, joined the old strip with the new one, and the blue beads, under the light, marked a shared destiny. The work grew. He didn't just carry packages. He sustained times. The elder checked the spare saddle. The younger sketched routes in pencil on a handmade map, with signs only they understood. A triangle where the stream swelled, a cross where the fallen tree still blocked the way, a spiral at the bend where the wind always turned before releasing its hail. The men with the star returned with another, boots clean, smell of new leather, and the voice of someone who believes the world is his signature. They spoke of laws without paper in hand. He stood in the entrance to the corral, feet spread like roots. "If there is an accusation, it is heard where it belongs," he said. "Here no one takes anyone by whim." The elder breathed at his side with the calm of a walker. The younger leaned her body just slightly forward. A gesture as small as a syllable and yet enough for the men to understand the line was drawn. They left, scattering fine dust that took its time to settle. That afternoon they began a shelf and a chalkboard. The shelf grew as an idea grows, space for medicines, seeds, cloth, tools, letters. The chalkboard gathered routes, schedules, notes for whoever might arrive when none of the 3 were there. "If you come from the south, Wait for the second crow of the rooster. If the river rises, use the Guadua bridge. If it's urgent, leave a white stone on the threshold. The old dog learned to wag its tail when it saw handkerchiefs tied to a post, a sign of a night errand. And a clay-faced boy began to stop by every afternoon to ask, without asking, if there was something to take to his mother, because in the end the trade of messenger spread small vocations, that of being useful. The route to the school by the river was their first great journey together, the three of them. The cart weighed like a long promise. Books, blackboards, notebooks, ink jars. No one wanted to take it for fear the storm would topple it. They said let's go without saying it, and the land, which understands determination, opened a path where there had been weeds. The elder guided the beast with a low voice. The younger walked beside the axle with her hand on the wood to distribute weight. He cleared the way with a machete, and it wasn't just brush he was cutting, it was ancient fear. At the ford, the water rose treacherous. The wheel bit into the mud until it nearly sank. The elder shouted a word he didn't know, but the beast understood at once. The younger levered with a branch, and the axle screamed as if expelling a demon. The messenger pushed with his shoulder as those push who, if they fall, drag the world with them. They came out wet, muddy, alive. They reached the town with a smell of new paper that brought tears to their eyes. The teacher shook their hands. The children touched the books as one touches a tame animal for the first time. They returned home with a strange silence, one that is not emptiness but fullness that has yet to find its word. Life organized itself around the new table. They decided routes and priorities as one prays without temples. If it rained in the north, medicines came first. If the heat pressed, seeds for those who sowed late. If a birth came early, two beasts and the canvas tied until it creaked. And through it all, love grew without scandal. The messenger learned to wait for the younger's hand seeking him under the table, to recognize the elder's gesture when something worried her, a near nothing in her brow, and to measure the exact spoonful of honey in each one's coffee. At night, the open door ceased to be defiance and became habit. The wind slipped in with scents they already knew how to name. Sometimes they slept restless. Sometimes they dropped like stones. They always woke with the same idea. Today, too, we must arrive. A young man with a star on his chest, different from the others, came one afternoon on a tired horse. He did not bring contempt. He brought a wrinkled paper and shame at the edge of his eyes. "My mother receives her mail here," he said. "If you fail, she is left without news. Not all think as I do, but if I can speak where speaking matters, I will." The elder looked at him without giving or taking away and nodded. The boy left more upright. Days later, the clean-booted ones returned with tales of cattle theft and accusations without names. They tried to push the door with grave voices. They found at the threshold rows of packages, people waiting their turn in silence, and a chalkboard with firm writing that read, "Today, north first. Then, east. Suggestions, to the box." Sometimes authority unarms itself when it finds usefulness where it expected chaos. The great storm came without asking the calendar. First a metallic smell in the air and then the white, unyielding line of lightning splitting the afternoon's mouth. The wind changed language, spoke suddenly, as if it had stored grievances. The cart's canvas whipped and one corner tore loose like the teeth of a furious dog. The elder leapt onto the wheel, grabbed the rope with arms tense as a bow, and shouted an instruction he obeyed before understanding it. The younger emptied the lower shelf. Letters, medicines, a few seconds left to think. She put the inked ones in a tin box, lifted cloths into a high chest, placed stones on the rug's edge so the ember wouldn't fly. When the hail burst on the roof, they were three behind the same tarp holding the same pole. The shack endured. Not because it was strong, but because every day they had found a better way to make it stand. When hail became rain and rain left only noise, the messenger opened the door. The night smelled of washed iron and of earth newly made again. The dog went out, shook off the mud, lay down again as if his job were to remind them that whatever happened, he would always be there. That same evening, they knocked on the door. Not the clean-booted ones. A woman with hair stuck to her forehead and a boy wrapped in a blanket, fever noises in his throat. They knew without saying, they had to go. The elder heated water, the younger readied the cart. He secured the canvas as one fastens a vow. They crossed the ford at night. The sky, which hours earlier had wanted to split the earth, now seemed to hold its breath. They arrived, delivered the medicine, waited for the fever to break. The woman said thank you with a thread of voice. They returned with the first diluted blue in the east. The shack awoke with the three of them before the table, hands on the warm wood, and the world was for a moment exactly the size of that gesture. The symbol of the circle with a line returned as certain memories do, without asking permission. On a package that came from the west, tied with a double knot, it was engraved on the leather, almost invisible unless one searched for it. He saw it out of the corner of his eye and knew it was no coincidence. He saved the package for the end of the day, like one who postpones a bite because he knows it will change him. When they finally opened it, they found inside a piece of cloth with the same circle marked in blue ink and a small pouch of beads identical to those in the tobacco tin. No sender, no destination, only that mark. The elder touched it with her fingertips as one tests the temperature of water before entering. Then she spoke a short, sharp word they did not understand, but that carried the weight of a door opening after years. The younger picked up the pouch of beads and put it around her neck. The messenger, who marked routes with charcoal, understood that this symbol was another kind of map, a sign that asked to be followed. He no longer wondered why they had returned. He began to think where they wanted to take him. That night, before sleep salted them with fatigue, they finally spoke of the past in low voices so as not to wake the dog or the walls. They gave no names. They spoke no dates. They told of distances. The elder described a ravine where the earth sounds hollow if you strike it because beneath there is stone. The younger drew with her finger on the table a path that forks and a tree with roots in the air. The circle with a line, the elder said at last, is not a signature nor an ornament. It is a sign of passage. Where it is, there is water. Where it is, someone left something for whoever knew how to read it. He did not ask what. Not yet. The clean-booted men returned with a man in a waxed coat who smelled of oil and paper. They brought a document full of signatures they wanted to weigh like lead. They spoke of taking the women to find out. The messenger felt his sternum was a drawer someone tried to rip the lock from. But he did not speak first. The elder stepped forward. She did not refer to laws, did not argue rights. She gave 3 routes, named 2 springs known only to those who walk them, marked the exact distance between the bridge and the river bend. No liar can speak of paths with such precision. The man in the waxed coat was left without concrete words. When arguments unraveled, only brute force remained, and brute force does not dare cross the door of a place where people wait for letters and medicines. They left, not because they believed, but because they found no way to dismantle the necessity of the post. The messenger did not celebrate. He sat on the step and let his body loosen. The younger curled beside him with her head on his shoulder. The elder remained standing, one hand on the doorframe, as one who keeps watch. That evening, the charcoal map on the wall learned a new stroke, a soft curve leaving the shack toward the west, with a circle at the end crossed by a line. The younger drew it without looking at the charcoal, as if she had held it in her palm since before she arrived there. He touched the drawing with his fingers and felt on his fingertips the roughness of the pine and, beneath, something seemed to vibrate in his chest. The sensation that the route not only goes outward, it also returns. The errands grew as trust grows, timid at first, then bold. They began to bring them things that do not break but hurt if lost: a wedding portrait wrapped in thick cloth, a lock of hair in an envelope, a grandmother's bread recipe written on a grease-stained paper, a ring in a little cedar-scented wooden box. They did not ask, but they cared for everything as if it were their own. And though the messenger never promised to arrive on time, there was something in his face that said otherwise. Maybe he would not arrive at the hour, but he would arrive with meaning. On the eve of the feast of those who live to the north, the plain filled with ribbons, and the air with the smell of sweet bread. The people on foot, who see better because they walk, began to defend the post without realizing it. A woman stood at the door and, when she saw an unfamiliar hat appear with intentions to argue, asked aloud if the medicine for the old man by the stream had been delivered yet. 2 men pretended to be drunk on the corner to stay close, just in case, and truly fell asleep with the dog at their feet. A boy nailed to the fence, with his own hand, a little board with 2 words: "Here arrives." The messenger saw these things out of the corner of his eye and kept the smile inside, because there are happinesses that, if named, break. One warm, windy night, while tightening the canvas for the dawn's journey, The younger asked the messenger to close his eyes and extend his hands. He obeyed with that new obedience born in him over the past months, a mix of respect and curiosity. She placed on his palms the little pouch with blue beads that had arrived in the package without a sender. The elder watched the gesture without jealousy, with a deep pride that warmed the shack more than the stove. He understood that this delivery, unlike all the others he had made, did not leave the shack outward, it stayed. He opened the pouch, took one bead, and slid it onto a thread. He tied the thread to a nail over the charcoal map, right on the circle with the line. The bead shone less than a star, but more than many words. They went to bed late, and sleep weighed like a wet blanket. At midnight, the dog growled low. He did not bark. That was what he did when danger approached on tiptoe. The messenger rose without making a sound. The elder was already sitting on the bed, feet on the floor, body ready. The younger placed her hand on the rifles, but without touching it. Outside, a pair of shadows outlined themselves against the lighter line of the horizon. They were not the clean-booted ones. They were two men with blankets on their shoulders, the unsteady gait of those who believe entering by night makes a weak intention braver. The messenger opened the door before they knocked. "Good evening," he said, with that courtesy he used as a tool. "If you've come seeking something, here there are only two things, work and respect. If you lack them, come back another day." One shadow advanced 2 steps, believing each step makes truer what he carried. The dog, who did not bite for sport, bared his teeth in silence. The shadow stopped. The wind got into one's blanket, lifted it, and left his chest cold. They left without even having a decent excuse. The door remained unbarred. Dawn found them with their hands busy before their minds. There was a delivery that could not wait, a small package for a woman who had just given birth on the far side of the ford, a sack of flour for a man who had burned his bread from falling asleep, 3 envelopes with red edges for someone awaiting news from very far away. They tied everything with care, tightened knots as if that were the last defense against chance, and set out. The road answered them well. They had earned the right to be welcomed on the route. On the way back, the younger stopped by a flat rock. On its surface, almost eaten by moss, was the circle with the line. She knelt and passed her hand over it as one greets an old friend. The elder crouched beside her, searched with her eyes for a tree that was no longer there, and pointed to the sky, where a flock of birds circled as if weaving the symbol in the air. The messenger, standing, understood without understanding. That sign was still a living language. He asked, for the first time, with a voice full of fingers on maps, "What do you expect us to do with this?" The elder answered without flourish, "Arrive," she said, "and open." They returned to the shack with an unspoken decision. The charcoal map received another mark, thicker, leaving the circle toward a point where they had not yet gone. They prepared the cart with the precision of a clock. This was not a delivery anyone had paid for with coins. It was an errand that had chosen them. They loaded tools, rope, a shovel, the tin box for letters that must not get wet, and bread wrapped in cloth. The dog, who rarely asked, climbed onto the cart on his own and lay between 2 sacks, because there are journeys animals understand better. The first slope demanded more of them than it seemed at first glance. The earth, in shadow, was soft. The weight pulled backward as if it had a will of its own. The elder levered with her body, and the wood responded with an old man's groan. The younger pushed with her back, heels dug in. The messenger pulled from the front, the rope at his waist and the world hanging from that thread. They climbed. No one spoke at the top. They stayed breathing, looked at where they had been and where they were going. Sometimes silence is the only honest measure of difficulty. The bend of the river offered them water. They drank slowly, because water is not only thirst, it is rhythm. There, on a stone smoother than the rest, was the circle with the line again, this time with 2 blue dots in diagonal. The younger took 2 beads from the pouch, placed them on the mark, and the sun lit them for a second, then returned them to the humble color of glass. They continued. The forest changed. The sounds grew deeper. The dog lifted his head once, again, and went back to sleep. That meant the road was good. When they finally reached the clearing, they knew it before they saw it. It is like recognizing a face from behind. The circle was carved into the trunk of a huge tree fallen years ago. Beneath, loose earth. The elder drove the shovel in without ceremony. The younger pushed aside small roots with hands firmer than feminine. The messenger reached in with his whole arm and pulled out a wooden box wrapped in leather. It was not heavy, but it weighed. They placed it on the cart. No one tried to open it there. They had learned in their trade that some things are opened at home. The return was easier, not because the earth had softened, but because the body grows accustomed to the idea of weight when the weight has purpose. The shack received them with cool shade, smell of bread, and a thread of music. Someone brought in a whistle from the path. They closed the door from inside for the first time, not to deny the world, but to honor what they had before them. They set the box on the table and waited for their heartbeats to align. The messenger cut the leather cord with a small knife he respected. The wood accepted the blade, yielded. Inside, a bundle of cloth smelling of things kept too long and something more, a sheaf of papers with ink not yet dead. The elder took the bundle with a gesture not of owner, but of daughter. The younger spread the cloth with care not to tear it. And there, at last, the origin of the symbol was told without anyone pronouncing it. Drawings of paths, marks of hidden water, signs for those who traveled on foot with no one's permission. It was a survival map. Each circle with line was a safe place, a point where once someone had left food, water, or words for the next. The blue beads were not ornaments. They were counters of lives saved. The elder looked at the messenger as one looks at someone who not only helps, but understands. The younger laid her hand on the table, right where the charcoal map was drawn. The dog, who could not read, curled up in the doorway and sighed with the peace of those who know they are home. That night they did not sleep much. Not from fear, but from urgency of life. They opened the papers. The ink told stories. Here we hid 2 moons. Here a woman left bread and returned with fever. Here a child wrote his name with a stone. The messenger passed his finger over each line and felt that the routes of his trade connected with deeper routes, older than any shopkeeper's ledger. The circle with line was no longer a foreign mark. It was now his own way of saying here. Not for themselves alone, for anyone who walked on foot with hunger, fear, or news too heavy to carry. At dawn, they nailed the first symbol to the door of the shack, small, discreet, on the lower edge, almost where no one looks. Not as a threat, nor as a slogan, but as a humble invitation. Here there is passage. Here things are left. Here things are received. Inside, on the table, they hung a short cord with 3 blue beads and a large knot. It was not a decoration. It was a reminder of why they did what they did. The messenger, who had always believed his mission was to deliver, understood that he could also keep, and that sometimes keeping is the deepest way of delivering. At sunrise, with the air still cold, 2 new riders arrived in the yard. They did not come to argue, they came to watch. They stayed with their hands on the reins, as if the leather were the only thing they could still hold on to. The elder came out with her chin high. The younger leaned on the doorframe with the confidence of one who no longer fears her own shadow. The messenger walked to the place where dust begins to become road. "Good morning," he said, and the word, simple, echoed in the yard as if it had been spoken for the first time. "Can I help you?" One of the riders pointed at the chalkboard with an awkward chin and asked if the mail for the south would leave before noon. "Yes," he said, like one who accepts a challenge already won. Then the rider lowered his eyes, and in his gesture there was more humanity than in any badge. That midday, the table received a bowl of beans and bread cut exactly into 3 equal portions. They ate with a calm that did not seem of the times they were living. They did not speak of the past, nor of the circle, nor of the beads. They spoke of rope, of wood, of whether the wheel needed greasing. Sometimes, to shelter the secret, one must make life with fierce normality. Afterwards, the younger took a piece of chalk and, under the charcoal map, wrote a short phrase, "If you don't arrive today, you arrive tomorrow. But you arrive." The elder gave her a light tap on the shoulder, as one approves. The messenger, without saying it, felt that phrase was the motto of his heart. In the afternoon, someone arrived in real haste, a man with his face opened by worry. His sister was on the edge between life and death in a hut 2 hours away, and the only possible medicine had to cross the ford the storm had left treacherous. The messenger stood up. The elder already had the rope. The younger put the tin box with the bottles wrapped in cloth. The dog climbed up without asking. They set out with the sun halfway down. The earth clung to the wheels as if it wanted them to stay. They crossed. They arrived. The woman breathed a little better. The man cried without sound, one of those cries that do not explode but release. They returned almost at night. They did not speak on the way, because there are journeys sanctified by silence. They entered the shack and the world, for a minute, was in its places. When the sky cleared a hand's width, the younger approached the wall where hung the 2 leather strips with beads, the old and the new. She added a third with 3 shining beads. She did not say what story each one represented. It was not needed. The messenger looked at the table, the shelf, the chalkboard, the dog, the unbarred door and, for the first time in his memory, felt that he was not only fulfilling his trade, he was in his destiny. And though they did not say it that night, the 3 knew that it was only just beginning. The sun rose wide when they decided to follow the trail of the circle with line toward the west. It was not a long conversation, just an exchange of glances over the table, the chalk still fresh under the charcoal map. The elder pointed to the drawing, the younger pressed her lips, and the messenger nodded. It was not a mission, it was a destiny calling. They prepared the cart with fewer provisions than they would have liked, but with more determination than they thought they had. The dog climbed up on his own, as always when the road smelled of danger. The road to the west was different, less known, rougher, with hills that seemed to play at hiding the trail and ravines that swallowed the sound of the wheels. The wind did not speak here. It barely whispered, as if it did not want anyone to understand what it said. The messenger kept his hand on the rifle, not because he expected a fight, but because the silence had an edge. The elder, at the front, with her gaze fixed on the line of the horizon, seemed to read invisible marks. The younger, behind, drew in her notebook every large stone, every twisted tree, as if she wanted to leave a record for those who would come after. On the 3rd day, the threat took shape. A group of riders appeared from a hillside, cutting off the road with dust and metal. They were not the same as the ones with crooked stars. These had the judge's mark on their hats, black feathers held with ribbon. A symbol as arrogant as it was dangerous. The messenger halted the cart. The elder placed her hand on his arm, a gesture more of control than of fear. The younger hid the notebook under the blanket and stayed still, eyes burning. The one leading the group had a waxed mustache and a sermon-like voice. That road is not authorized. The law says you must return to town. The messenger looked at him without moving. The law I respect comes with signed paper, not with feathers stolen from crows. There was a murmur of tense laughter among the riders. The elder stepped forward, barefoot, braid down her back like a flag. This road was not made by you or your judges. It was made by the feet that know hunger. We follow that route. If you want to stop it, you'll have to carry all the stories buried here. The mustached man tightened his jaw, but did not advance. There was something in that woman that not even the feathers could overcome. The messenger urged the beast on, and the cart continued, slow but steady. The riders moved aside, not by will, but because the weight of those 3 presences together seemed greater than any order. When they left the group behind, silence returned, but now it was a silence full of heartbeats. On the 4th day, they reached a canyon. At the entrance, on the tallest stone, was the circle with the line again. This time there were 3 marks around it, like rays of the sun. The younger drew them in her notebook. The elder placed her hand on the rock and whispered something in her language. The messenger bent down, looked at the marks, and understood that this place was more than a point on the map. It was a sanctuary. Beneath the stone, they found a hiding place, a sack of seeds, a knife wrapped in leather, a bundle of new blue beads. It was not a random offering. It was the legacy of generations that had kept alive that language of symbols. The cart continued through the canyon, the echo multiplying every creak. Midway, a sandstorm rose like a wall. The dog howled low, the beast neighed. The messenger covered his eyes. The elder pulled the rope to protect the load. The younger crouched with the notebook under her body. The world turned yellow and rough, the air scraping like a blade. They advanced blindly, step by step, until the cloud opened like a curtain, leaving them exhausted but standing. On the other side, the landscape was different, a wide valley, with low grass and a stream that still sang. That night, by the fire, they finally spoke of the judge. The elder told how he had ordered hunts disguised as justice, how he had used the black feathers as a mark of power. The younger revealed that many of the symbols of the circle with a line had been erased by the judge's men, attempting to erase the memory of her people. The messenger listened with his head lowered, hands pressed to the ground. He understood that it was not just about letters or provisions. What they carried now was the last network of routes of a people who had learned to survive in silence. At dawn, they decided to return to the post. They could not lose what they had found. But they knew the judge and his men would not stay still. The return would be confrontation. And, in some way, also birth. The circle with line was no longer just an ancient symbol. It was now their banner. The return was different. Not only because the cart was heavier with the seeds, the knife, and the beads, but because each will seem to mark a word in the earth. We return. The messenger went in silence, but his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon as if he expected the threat to emerge from any fold of the land. The elder walked beside the cart, steady step, straight back, as if she could sustain with her very presence the decision they carried. The younger, behind, drew in her notebook even while walking, recording the valley, the stream, the marks that would soon disappear with the wind. The dog, always alert, glanced sideways at every shadow, every shape in the distance. On the 5th day, turning a bend, they saw smoke. It was not from a peasant hearth, it was smoke from a burned hut. They advanced cautiously until they found what they feared. A small hamlet was reduced to ashes, hoofprints still fresh in the soil. On one of the charred beams, someone had drawn with ash the circle with line. The younger fell to her knees before the mark, notebook in hand, head bowed. The elder held her by the shoulders. The messenger clenched his teeth and swore silently that the judge and his black feathers would pay for every symbol erased with fire. They kept going, but the tension grew thicker. 2 days later, while skirting a dry stream, the riders caught up with them. There were 6, with black feathers gleaming on their hats. The one with the waxed mustache smiled with contempt. "We told you to turn back. Now there will be no warnings." He raised his hand and 2 men drew rifles. The messenger stepped down from the cart, old rifle in his hands, gaze steady. "If you want to pass, you'll have to stain yourselves with our blood. And I warn you, the earth does not forget." The air tightened like a rope ready to snap. Then the elder raised her voice. She did not shout, she spoke as one speaks when each word carries centuries behind it. "Do you know what these feathers you wear mean? They are theft. You tore them from the crows, but they will never be yours. You do not know the symbols you erase. You do not know the names you silence. But we do. And as long as one of us lives, the circle with line will continue to mark water and passage. Neither judges nor rifles can kill that." The echo of her voice bounced off the hills, and for an instant the riders hesitated. The mustached man spat on the ground and lowered his hand. "Once again you'll have luck. But we'll see in the town if the people defend you when the judge speaks." They turned away with feigned bravado, but the messenger knew it was only a postponement. The real clash would be where everyone could see. When they finally reached the post, the entire town was already murmuring. The children ran behind the cart pointing at the blue beads, the women leaned out from their doors, the men whispered among themselves. The messenger unloaded the cart calmly, as if nothing were extraordinary, but each object shone as if it carried history: the seeds, the knife, the papers. The younger pinned a new sheet on the chalkboard, drawing the circle with lines surrounded by rays. The elder stood in the doorway, braid hanging like a banner. And without saying it, it became clear that the post was no longer just a way station. It was a refuge. The judge arrived 3 days later. He did not come alone. He brought with him 10 armed men and a crowd that followed, half out of fear, half out of curiosity. He stopped in front of the post, his fine coat shining under the sun. "I have heard that in this place forbidden symbols are hidden, that you mock authority and give refuge to those who do not deserve it. Today this farce ends." His words fell like a whip, but there was no silence afterward. Instead, the townspeople stepped forward. First a woman who raised a yellowed envelope. "Here my son's letters from the war arrived thanks to them." Then an old man who lifted a jar. "Here they brought me the medicine that saved me when no one else came." Then a boy, the same one who had nailed the little board to the fence, raised his small hand. Here I learned to wait for someone. One by one, faces joined, forming a wall of testimonies before the judge. The elder stepped forward, the younger at her side, the messenger in the middle. "This is not about hiding," said the elder, "but about remembering. There is life here, and we will not give up what sustains the people." The judge clenched his jaw, but even his men hesitated. You do not shoot at those who carry the food and letters of your people. And though the judge's power was strong, it could not withstand a community that had decided to stand. The mustached man tried to raise his voice, but the dog growled, and that growl weighed more than all the black feathers. The crowd closed like a circle. The judge backed down. And when he turned his horse, the feathers no longer looked like insignia, they looked like shame. That night, the post shone with a different light. The new table was full of bread, beans, coffee, and soft laughter. The townspeople had left offerings at the door: corn, pumpkins, candles. The little tobacco tin with the beads was no longer a secret, but an open symbol. The younger wrote on the chalkboard a short word: together. The messenger looked at her, then at the elder, and knew there was no turning back. They were not three strangers sharing a roof. They were family. And the post, more than a refuge, was home. That dawn, while the wind blew softly and the door remained unbarred, the messenger lay listening to the breathing beside him. He thought of the first time he had left bread on a stone for two hungry girls. He thought of the blue beads he had kept as a lonely treasure. And he smiled, because he understood that what had once been a small gesture had now blossomed into a destiny neither he nor they could have imagined. The circle with line did not only mark water, it marked love, resistance, and a shared future. The town was different after that confrontation. It was not that the houses had changed place or the streets had widened, but something invisible had shifted. The looks were no longer timid or distrustful, but complicit. Each time someone passed in front of the post, they left something at the door: a handful of corn, a piece of bread, a jar of fresh water. Not as payment, but as a declaration that this place was no longer just the messengers and the sisters. It belonged to everyone. The circle with line, drawn with chalk on the wall, began to appear in other places. Someone marked it on the trunk of a nearby tree, another carved it on the beam of his corral, a boy traced it in the sand before the wind carried it away. The symbol had awakened and ran from hand to hand, from gaze to gaze. The messenger kept working as always, but now each delivery carried another weight. When he carried a letter, he felt he was not only carrying words, but trust. When he lifted a sack of flour onto the cart, he understood that in that sack also went the town's recognition. And each time he returned to the post, he found the sisters transforming the place into something greater than he had dreamed. The elder organized the provisions with an efficiency that made the old shelf seem small. The younger filled her notebook with symbols and maps, creating a record that someday could guide others through safe routes. But calm never lasts in lands where justice is measured in bullets. The judge, though humiliated, had not given up. His men with black feathers disappeared for weeks, but rumors came like echoes, that he was recruiting more, that he was looking for papers to justify an eviction, that he had promised the landowners to put an end to the farce of the post. The messenger heard those words in the market, in the cantina, in the square, and kept them as one keeps dry powder, knowing that sooner or later they would explode. Meanwhile, daily life wove itself with a beautiful normality. The post was now a gathering place. Each morning peasants arrived with errands: a sack of beans for the sick aunt, a message for the son in the army, a small package with ribbons for a wedding. The messenger checked each delivery with the seriousness of a scribe, wrote it in his notebook, and then the sisters organized the cart. At dusk, there was always someone sitting on the threshold, telling stories or sharing coffee. The dog became the official guardian, always lying by the door, wagging his tail only slightly when he recognized friendly footsteps. The elder had earned a silent respect. No one dared raise their voice to her. Her presence imposed, not by violence, but by that calm of one who knows paths and knows how to wait. The younger, on the other hand, drew smiles. Her laughter, once rare, began to flow more often. Sometimes she helped the children trace symbols in the sand. Other times, she taught the women to sew stronger stitches. The messenger watched her out of the corner of his eye, surprised by the tenderness that flowed from her without her trying. And when the elder caught him looking, instead of jealousy, There was in her eyes a glimmer of complicity, as if to say, "You see her as I see her." One warm afternoon, while repairing the cart's wheel, the younger pulled out her notebook and showed it to the messenger. The pages were full of symbols, circles with lines, spirals, crosses, dashes. Each one with notes in the margins, arrows marking distances, drawings of trees, rivers, and mountains. "It's a map," she said softly, "but not like the ones the soldiers use. This one speaks of hunger and of water, of where to hide and where to trust." The messenger ran his fingers over the paper and felt he was touching not ink, but living memory. "With this," said the elder, "we can keep the route alive even if they try to erase it 1,000 times." The messenger nodded, knowing that what they held in their hands was worth more than any weapon. The seasons passed, and with them came sowing time. The post also became a center of exchange. Seeds brought from the west were distributed among the peasants. Some came to ask advice on how to plant, and the elder knelt beside them in the soil, patiently showing how to cover the grain. The younger drew furrows in her notebook and shared them with the children, as if they were school lessons. The messenger, meanwhile, went back and forth with the cart, making sure each ranch received what it needed. It was not the work of one man. It was the work of 3 who had decided to multiply themselves into many. But the threat returned, like an inevitable shadow. One moonless night, a gunshot broke the silence. The bullet passed through the corral, startling the goats. The dog barked furiously. The messenger ran out with a rifle in his hands, the elder at his side with a knife, the younger behind with a notebook pressed to her chest as if it were a shield. They found no one, only tracks that vanished in the darkness. The next day, the entire town appeared at the post. Men, women, and children offered to stand guard. No one wanted what they had built to fall into the judge's hands. That night, the post was not alone. There were torches around it, watchful silhouettes, low voices telling stories to stay awake. The messenger watched all this with a knot in his throat. He remembered his years of solitude, the nights when only the whistling wind kept him company. Now, instead, he felt that every breath of those people sustained him. The elder placed a hand on his shoulder, strong, firm. The younger, without a word, leaned on his arm. And in that instant he knew he could no longer conceive of life without them, without the town, without that post that had become the heart of the valley. The frontal attack came at dawn. The judge's men appeared from the hillside, 15 riders with rifles and machetes. The sun rose behind them, painting them as giant shadows. The messenger stepped forward, rifle in hand. The elder and the younger stood at his side. Behind them, the entire town formed a human wall. They were not soldiers, but they carried tools, sticks, stones. And above all, they carried determination. The judge, elegant in his fine coat, raised his voice. "Last chance. Hand me those women and close this post. Fear does not belong to me, but to you. If you do not obey, I will raise everything." The messenger took a deep breath. He looked at the town, looked at the sisters, looked at the judge. Then he spoke calmly. "Many years ago, I found 2 hungry girls and gave them bread and water. Today those girls are here, alive, strong. If I hand them over, I betray who I am. If I close this post, the heart of the valley dies. So listen well, judge. Here there is no obedience to injustice. Here there is only passage for life. And if you want to extinguish it, you will have to go over all of us." The silence lasted an eternal second. Then a woman raised a hoe. A man lifted a club. The boy with a little board stepped forward with a stone in his hand. The elder drew her knife. The younger, trembling but firm, held the notebook as if it were a banner. The dog growled low, hair bristling. And then, as if the earth itself chose, a gust of wind raised dust, blinding the riders. The judge's beast reared. One of his men fired into the air by mistake. Chaos broke out in seconds. Shouts, hooves, dust. The town stood firm, advancing like a wave. The messenger fired once, not to kill, but to warn. The elder knocked a rider down with the hilt of her knife. The younger shouted a word in her language, and the entire town responded with a clamor that echoed through the valley. The judge's men, overcome not by weapons but by conviction, retreated. One by one they turned their horses, retreating under insults and stones that fell like rain. The judge was the last to leave, his gaze full of hatred. "This is not over," he spat before disappearing into the dust. But everyone knew it was over. Not because the judge could not return, but because he had already lost the most important thing, the people's fear. That afternoon, the Post celebrated. Not with shouts or parties, but with an emotional silence. They all sat at the long table. Peasants, children, elders. They shared bread, coffee, beans. The messenger, the elder, and the younger looked at each other and knew the struggle had united them beyond any oath. They were no longer three surviving together. They were three sustaining a world. The elder leaned over the table, took the messenger's hand and squeezed it firmly. The younger placed her hand on top of theirs. The town watched in silence, and in that gesture it saw reflected the strength of everything they had built. That night, lying down with the door open and the soft wind flowing in, the messenger thought he had finally arrived at his destination. And that circle with line, symbol of passage and water, now also meant love and home. Time passed, and the symbol began to spread beyond the valley. Travelers found it carved into trees, stones, fences. Some did not know what it meant, but felt calm upon seeing it. Others, who had heard the story, took it as a sign of hope. The messenger grew old, with wrinkles on his face and strength still in his hands. The sisters grew at his side, wise, beautiful, always steadfast. And the Post never ceased to function. Each letter, each package, each seed was a small victory against forgetting. And so, what began with a piece of bread left on a stone for two hungry girls became a legend. One that said in the valley there was a place where no one was a stranger, where life had passage, and where love needed no permission. The years passed like wind over the plains, soft at times, harsh at others, but always leaving a mark. The messenger, his hair now gray and his wrinkles etched by the sun, still climbed onto the cart every morning. His movements were slower, but no less firm. At his side, the elder walked upright, with the same strength in her gaze as the first time she appeared at his door under the storm. The younger, now with the serenity of maturity, still drew symbols, filling entire notebooks with maps and memories. The town had changed. Where once there had been scattered huts, now there were sturdy houses of adobe and wood. Where once there had been mistrust, now there was community. The Post had become the heart of the valley, not only as a place of passage, but as a place of gathering. Every traveler knew that there they could find water, bread, warmth, and someone willing to listen. No one left empty-handed, even if they only received a symbol drawn on the palm as a sign of a safe path. The circle with line was no longer a secret. It was painted on doors, carved on fences, marked on cloth. It became an emblem of belonging. When someone saw it in the distance, they knew there was refuge there, that there no one asked where you came from or what you carried, but whether you were hungry, thirsty, or in need of company. It was the password of those who walked, the promise of those who resisted. The messenger and the sisters never married in a church, nor signed papers. They did not need to. Their union was evident in every gesture, in how they shared bread, in how they sought each other's gaze at the end of the day, in how they held each other in silence when the memory of old losses returned. The town recognized them as family, without need of titles or permissions. They were simply inseparable. With time, the children of the valley began to go to the Post not only for errands, but for learning. The younger taught them to read and write, using her notebooks as blackboards. She showed them the ancient symbols and explained that each stroke held a story. The elder instructed them in practical tasks: planting, harvesting, repairing fences. The messenger, though quieter with age, took them in the cart to learn the roads, showing them that every route had secrets and that being a courier was not just about carrying things, it was about carrying hope. Rumors about the judge faded with time. It was said he died far away, in lands where no one mourned him. His men with black feathers disappeared, some joining the valley, others lost on roads that never returned. The Post had survived the greatest threat, and that victory became a story told by the fire every winter. One summer afternoon, when the sky burned orange and purple, the messenger sat on the Post's threshold with the old dog lying at his feet. He watched the children running around, the sisters preparing coffee inside, and felt that the loneliness of his youth was as distant as a blurred dream. He pulled from his pocket the little tobacco tin where he still kept the 2 strips of blue beads, the first they had left him as children and the one they brought back when they returned 15 years later. He placed them on the table, watched them shine in the evening light, and smiled. "It all began with a piece of bread," he murmured to himself. And in that phrase, everything was contained. When at last his final night came, there was no sadness or fear. He lay down on the same bed as always, with the sisters at each side holding his hands. Outside, the wind blew softly and the circle with lines still stood drawn on the wall of the post. His breathing faded like a lamp consuming its oil, and when he exhaled for the last time, it seemed the air itself had chosen to keep him in the valley's memory. The sisters did not weep with wailing. They bid him farewell with soft songs in their language, with candles lit around him, with the entire community gathered in silence. They buried him beneath the great tree in front of the post, and over his grave they placed a stone marked with the circle and line. Nothing more was needed. Whoever saw that mark would know that there rested the man who saved 2 girls and, without intending it, changed the destiny of an entire people. The years went on. The sisters grew old together, keeping watch over the post. The children who had learned to read at their table became couriers, teachers, farmers, mothers and fathers who taught others the value of sharing. And each time one of them took a new road, they carried with them a symbol, a circle with line. They painted it on stones, carved it into trunks, drew it on letters. The legacy multiplied, spreading beyond the valley. With time, the symbol reached other towns. Some called it the sign of safe passage, others the messenger's path, and there were those who interpreted it as a mark of resistance. But no matter the name, all agreed on one thing. Wherever there was a circle with line, there was hope. The messenger was gone, but his life kept walking in every route. And the sisters, sitting each evening on the threshold, saw on the horizon the dust lifted by new carts, new generations that had learned that being a courier was not just any trade. It was to be a bridge between solitudes, a guardian of memory, and a builder of the future. And so, the story of the man who saved 2 Apache girls, and who they, years later, chose as their life companion, never faded. Not because someone wrote it in a book, but because it remained carved in every symbol, in every delivery, in every shared table. The circle with line continued marking water, passage, and love long after its protagonists had departed. And to this day, the old ones of the valley say, if you travel at night and see on a stone a circle crossed by a line, you may rest without fear. Because there, in the invisible, still walks the spirit of the messenger and the 2 sisters who accompanied him. And so, what began with a simple piece of bread shared beside a stone in the desert ended up becoming one of the greatest stories of resistance, love, and hope. The messenger who saved 2 girls not only gave them food, he gave them a future, a home, and a place to belong. They, in return, came back to love him, and together they raised a symbol that neither time nor injustice could erase. The circle with line not only marked water and safe passage, it also marked the strength of a united community and the power of believing that there will always be someone willing to extend a hand. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video so that more people may know the legend of the messenger and the 2 sisters. Because in the end,